it was after. I mean, he's got it out and he flings it. I mean, that's kind of what I see.
So when you say he's got it out and he flings it, you mean he's not got the gun in the position where he can be a danger to the officers?
Right. So if you look at the position of the gun, he's holding it on the barrel, barrel facing down initially, and then he kind of pulls it up and flings it.
Police department says the muzzle of the gun pointed at the officers, and that was their cue to fire.
It's possible that as he was holding it, but you've got to imagine that the muzzle is on the other side of his hand. So he doesn't have his hand on the trigger, right? He doesn't have it on the handle. He's got it on the hand, fling. That's what I'm saying. Now, of course, you know, it's all happening very fast. But on the other hand, here's somebody trying to discard a gun. It's after, you know, maybe just seconds after he discards it and is putting his hands up, and he's already put his hands up once before, that the officers fire, and then multiple officers fire into basically a crowd.
So from your perspective, do you believe that this was officers should have fired?
I mean, you know, from my perspective, I believe officers should very rarely fire, right? Like unless there is just, it's clear that their lives are in danger or others' lives are in danger. Now, I think they can make the case that it was both things because here's a person with a gun, right? And he's got the gun in his hand. You know, the unfortunate reality is that we live in a world where a lot of people have guns, right? And if every time officers sort of see a gun, they're going to be able to fire into a crowd, that's probably not optimal, right? So I think there has to be, you know, a lot of checkpoints for officers. You know, fine, the person is holding a gun, but do they appear to be pointing it at anybody? Are they aggressive towards me? Are they trying to get away from me, right? Am I shooting them in the front? Am I shooting them in the back? And sort of what's the surrounding situation? But instead, I think officers are quite often trained like any second you will die from this shot. And that simply is a statistical matter, not true, right? It is actually very rare for officers to die of being shot. Now, maybe the police would say in response, that's because they shoot first, but not really, right? The evidence is mixed on whether the shoot first or be more de-escalating is actually safer for officers. And there is a case to be made that not shooting first is actually safer for officers. But in any case, you know, I think that we need to explore in situations like this more than just whether a person had a gun or had their hand on a gun, but what is the likely scenario? And as a statistical matter, the likely scenario is not that anyone will get shot unless the police come in shooting like they did.
Let me ask you about the crowd.
Okay.
How does that factor into this decision of whether to shoot or not?
I absolutely think it should factor into the decision because if you look at the videotape, when we have that discarding, right, the suspect discarding and then his hands are coming up, you see one shot and then several shots come. And one thing you see in the background is a guy standing there jumping over sort of this railing between the bar and the street. So there's literally people in the line of fire. And then when you consider the officer who's shooting down the street, there's a Greek food truck with a whole line of people waiting for food. So, I mean, this is a very different scenario than, you know, sort of an isolated incident with a person on a street. This is a scenario where you're firing literally at people who are bystanders in front of a bar that has glass windows and down a street where there's people waiting in line for food. So that's a high risk of bystanders getting shot.
And they did, right? We have bystanders injured. Do you think that that's going to impact whether this shooting ends up being ruled justified or not?
It's an interesting thing because I think that, you know, when we think of the use of force, and a lot of critics of sort of police unnecessary use of force or use of force against unarmed people or excessive use of force, you know, kind of fault the law here, which is very permissive to the police, right? But in this particular case, there was a gun. So usually what we look at is just that instance when the officer sees the gun, and we determine right there, was the officer justified? And usually don't look at the surrounding situations to determine whether the officer was reasonable, right? So maybe the officer was reasonable in, shooting because of the gun, but then you have to look at other sort of environmental factors. Was it reasonable given the position of the gun? Should they have tried other things? Or maybe, after that initial shot, a taser or anything else, I heard a taser going off, given that there was a crowd. So I think you could bring that into reasonableness, but usually under the law, it's just a matter of, was the officer who shot in the moment acting reasonably? And, for better or worse, I mean, I personally think for worse, with a gun being on the scene, right, and in the hand of a suspect, it's going to be hard to say this was unreasonable.
How does the time of this all elapsing within, from the moment of contact to the moment of the shooting is less than 30 seconds, how does that time factor into this?
So I really think that we need to think about reasonableness in the law. And I've said this before, I've actually written on this in a more global way, right? So you think about the parents of the kids who were shot on that scene. And they're thinking, well, wait a second, it was completely unreasonable for my child to get shot while waiting in line for Greek food. And usually we just look at the officer. What I think is we need to globally look at how the entire incident was handled. And frankly, it's a police departmental matter, whether the way they handled the entire situation as it unfolded was reasonable. So we have a fist fight, and then we have several armed officers on the scene. We have the two people trying to get away, right? And instead of sort of like trying to like isolate them down the street or give them many chances to comply, the minute that gun is seen, it's like a free-for-all of shooting, right? And just, whether that all was worth it to catch some people in a fist fight. Could there have been another way to find them? Like, we have pictures of them. We could go to their house and arrest them the next day. Whether any of this way that we handle street, crime from minor to more major, like a punch, makes sense given just kind of the rash of police and other shootings we have. Right? And especially when, when police get associated with mass mayhem, what do people do when they see the police? They run. And running's also sometimes used as grounds to shoot people. So I just think the whole situation, just globally, how we handle people in a fight outside of the bar, how we handle traffic violations, how we handle petty thefts, needs to be rethought, other than these armed police officers kind of all amped up, ready to shoot, right? Because I just think that is escalating a cycle of violence. I think what stands out most to me is just how many shots there were by how many police officers. There were apparently 7 or so shots by 3 police officers in such a crowded sidewalk. I mean, this isn't even like a bar that's still going, right? The bar has now closed. The people really empty out into the sidewalk waiting for food, hanging out, some getting in fights. And it was just so dense, the population, that amount of shots by that many officers in that population is really unsettling.
Let me ask you this. This might be a tough question to answer, and I might be completely off base, but is there a scenario in which you say, look, the law is probably going to say this is legally justified, but maybe it wasn't right for the officers to do this?
So when we have a standard for use of force versus excessive use of force versus, the police officer can even go to jail, right? Like we saw with George Floyd, it's usually a standard of reasonableness. Now, that's a slippery standard, but the way that courts have defined it has been very unsatisfying to people who want to see sort of larger scale changes, right? They've defined it as sort of the officer in the exact moment, right? Was the shooting justified? And anytime there's a gun, which we also have to rethink because so many people have guns these days, it's justified for the most part. I think we should think about it more globally. Like, was it reasonable, the entire series of events? Was this the way to handle the report of a fight? when people are sort of walking away and trying to blend in, is this the way we want to deal with them? Can we just take their pictures, identify them, go arrest them tomorrow, right, on simple assault charges? Or, is it better if we sort of tactically try to move them down the sidewalk away from the crowd? Or if we maybe start with tasers or something less deadly? So I think we can think about all of that. But the frank reality is the way that courts have carved out what is unreasonable for an officer to do in terms of using deadly force, it's very, very permissive to police. And a lot of people would say that's why we keep having these unnecessary police, shootings and violence.
One thing that's, I don't know what the law is here in Colorado. I came from Tennessee, where I spent a number of years, and the law there is when juries or district attorneys make decisions on charging officers in cases like this, they are to watch it in real time. They're supposed to, evaluate the decision based on what the officers saw in real time. And I'm just curious, I don't know if the standard is the same here in Colorado, that the decision on whether this use of force was appropriate is, currently defined as what did the officers see at that moment?
No, it's an excellent question, and one that I've, struggled with as a legal academic. We have two sort of different scenarios going on, right? One scenario is a civil rights scenario. Are the police acting reasonably in our community, or are they using excessive force? The other one is a criminal law scenario. Does this police officer deserve to go to jail for a murder or a manslaughter, right? And we mix the standards for those things. As a former criminal defense attorney, I think, you have to be very deferential to, the police shooting when you're about to tell them they're a terrible person and put them in jail, right? On the other hand, if you have a parent of one of the people shot, who wants to sue the department and say, I think you are handling these scenarios unreasonably, well, that same standard, that's very deferential to the officer, right? Don't second guess the officer, look at it in the split second that the officer had to make the decision, also applies to those civil suits, right? And I think that's why, you definitely want to give an officer, right? Like who's told this is a job you're supposed to do. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt before you just throw them in jail, and throw away the key. But how are you going to get, the best, most de-escalating, most appropriate for the community standard if you're being so deferential to the police as a civil rights matter? So you're right, those two things are the same. I think they should be separate.
I just have a couple more questions for you really quickly. One is, it sounds like what you're saying is, in this case, this case exemplifies what you're saying is, look, we need to rethink policing, or the way police act in these scenarios.
I absolutely think we need to rethink policing. We need to, I have been through a police training, and the way the police are trained is in an exact scenario like that. If you don't shoot that person who's about to discard their gun, you're going to get shot and die, or they're going to shoot somebody else. So this first resort of killing, this shoot first approach, it makes sense from that point of view. But if you look at it differently, if you look at it as a matter of statistics, how likely is it for any police officer to get shot in a confrontation? It's very rare, right? And even when people are armed, and many people are armed, they comply all the time, right? And in fact, you see cases in which somebody has just done a mass shooting and they're still armed with a gun and they're subdued by police, right? So it's, I think it is something that we think of that's ingrained in us. Anybody with a gun, they're automatically, just a bundle of walking explosive risk. And that kind of leads to one way of acting, which is shoot first. But if you thought of other things like, okay, there are people who are armed, but people holding their barrel down and kind of going to fling it, right, are less of a threat. Or we really want to isolate the person we know is armed and not shoot first in a crowd. Or, if it's a fight, we want to try to de-escalate the situation without drawing firearms first. There are just many, many things that can be done other than using deadly force and potentially taking life or severely injuring people. But I don't think we have the mentality on police departments to make that change. And I think it would be hard frankly, to recruit officers. If you tell them you can't shoot first, you've got to, de-escalate. In fact, we're going to disarm you. Because they're also in the mindset that if I don't shoot first, I'll die. But the statistics don't necessarily support that.
I'm going to take a little bit of a right turn here and ask you about grand jury investigations. Because the district attorney has asked for a grand jury to review this footage to decide whether the officers have committed a crime here.
Right.
For people who have very little knowledge of the legal process, what does that mean? What does a grand jury mean in this case?
So the grand jury is a body of citizens. It's bigger than an ordinary jury, and they sit for a term. I think in Colorado, I'm not 100% sure, but it's a term of months, right? And they basically decide whether there is probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed. So whatever the crime is, excessive use of force, assault, attempted murder, any sort of number of crimes that can come out of that. Now, probable cause is not beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So it's a lower standard, plus there's no defense attorneys in grand juries. So basically what happens is the prosecutor comes up and says, okay, we believe X, and the grand jury just goes along with it. That's what happens 99% of the time. So I don't know how the prosecutors are going to present this case, right? But I think if they, sort of slice and diced it, showing the guy, sort of shooting into the crowd, you could imagine the grand jury going one way. If they sliced and diced it, like really showing that barrel, just hammering on the barrel from the suspect that he was holding, remember, not holding the trigger, I think the grand jury could go another way, right? But it's a low standard. They merely have to find probable cause to believe that a crime is committed and not proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right, what you're getting at there is the idea of this ham sandwich analogy that's often used here.
Yeah, but the ham sandwich, so the old saying is that a jury would indict a ham sandwich, right? If ham sandwich committed the crime, we must take this to trial. Yes, they'll do it. It's not necessarily true of police officers who, are being brought to the grand jury as potential suspects. Prosecutors tend to act like defense attorneys during those grand jury proceedings in ways they don't in other ones. Now, prosecutor could just indict officers. A prosecutor could just bring charges against officers, just like they can bring charges against anybody. But in these kinds of cases, they like to get the grand jury's eyes on it because, they're explosive, controversial cases and they involve police officers. But, how much of a check that is on just plain old prosecutorial discretion is kind of up in the air because the grand jury can often do pretty much what the prosecutor presents to them to do.
Tom, do you have any questions that stand out to you?
No, it's really interesting. It's just, I don't have any other. I could stand here.
I could too.
I'll give you a Crim Pro lesson.
No. Can I get you to sit over here? I just want to get a couple more shots. I do have a question for you though. And
Here, I'll stand here.
so, what are you doing currently for work? Are you teaching kids?
I am teaching law students.
Okay, so where would this case fit? Is this anything that
This would be in my use of force.
Oh.
That would be in criminal procedure, Fourth Amendment. I don't know if you wanted me to say Fourth Amendment.
Okay, no, you're fine saying whatever you
Okay.
want to say, but just...
Yeah, that would be in, this is, definitely a Fourth Amendment issue, but again, that can either be a civil issue, a civil rights issue, or a criminal issue. And the Fourth Amendment prevents unreasonable searches and seizures. And the question is, when does the police level of force make it an unreasonable seizure, right? So usually what makes a seizure reasonable is that police have probable cause to believe a crime has been committed. Well, they saw the guy punch the guy. That's clearly not a problem, to just arrest him on the spot. The question in these excessive force cases is not whether they had grounds to arrest the guy, but whether the manner of seizing him was so excessive that it violates the Fourth Amendment's reasonableness requirement. And again, I think it should be a different standard personally for when you are prosecuting an individual officer and when you're suing the police department for violation of civil rights. But right now they're very much melded.
Melded together.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, can I get you guys looking at that?
Yeah. Oh, here, I'll pull this back
Yeah.
up. It'll make me type my password in again, which is a test if I can remember it right. No. When we look through some of this footage, I mean, what else stands out to you about seeing this happen? Maybe we should pull from the side view because we haven't pulled that up
Yeah.
necessarily yet.
And you know, I was looking and looking for the muzzle, you know, the shot from that officer.
And I don't know that we see it.
And we can't see, at least I could not see it.
It does look like the suspect here sees
That officer.
officer on the side.
Right, and it has that hand up. And remember, he put his hands up before, so he clearly knows that he can get shot in this scenario. And I just suspect that he went behind the car to discard the gun, or maybe to discard some drugs, right? This, you know, just in my experience, seems like a very clear discarding contraband situation. But, you know, in the process of discarding this gun, there's another officer there, you know, seeing him with a gun. And once he shoots, it seems the other officer shot also, which, you know, I find the side shot very problematic because of the crowd. But even the additional front shots, you know, in towards the bar are troubling.
Yeah, because I mean, you can see in this picture.
You see a guy hop over. I mean, he hops over that
Here.
area right there. Yeah.
So those shots presumably are firing now.
Yeah. See,
He's jumped up over the
there's a guy. Yeah.
ledge there.
I don't know if he was shot though. There was a guy who crawled in that kind of looked like that guy.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard for us to tell exactly. There's some people we believe who were
Shot here. You know, one thing I didn't mention that really affected me in seeing this video was you see the people in line for the Greek food, and once the shots started occurring, you literally see a boyfriend take his body and cradle it around, I think the woman who was shot. But it's chilling to see, you know, he used his body as a human shield because shots were coming.
And in this case, coming from police.
And in this case, coming from police.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all your insight on this.